Hey everyone, so what we're going to do in this episode is we're just going to upload our chart of accounts. So let's start from scratch so I'm not confusing anyone. So let's close everything over here. So what we really want to do is we want to import our chart of accounts into AX. So within AX, the chart of accounts is actually shared across legal entities. So what that means is if you use a chart of accounts for company A and you'd like to use that same chart of accounts for company B, you can. You can also then restrict certain main accounts to certain companies or legal entities. But all of these kind of variations and ways of utilizing the chart of accounts I'll go through as we set up. Really, this episode isn't going to be too much on the technical side of things, but really just to import a very basic chart of accounts. What the setup requirements are to get that chart of accounts working, and then from there we'll slowly but surely start configuring the general ledger and start being able to transact within our ERP system. So something I always mention to people, but I'm not sure whether they really pay attention or indeed whether they realize the significance of it. But really your general ledger is the most important aspect of your ERP system. So some people will say, oh, but we're a manufacturing company, so manufacturing must be the most important, or we're a supply chain. But really it comes down to a very simple aspect, is it's a financial system. So for every manufacturing transaction, there's a financial implication. For every supply chain transaction, there's a financial implication. So if your sub-modules, so these are all sub-modules, accounts payable, accounts receivable, budgeting, all of these are sub-modules, these wonderful lists. So they all have financial implications. The ledger is your primary. So if you think in Transformers, it's the main guy, it's the boss, it's the if you're thinking of the Godfather and you're thinking Mafia, it's the captain, it's the guy that all the decisions have to go through. So really, if you got a poor captain, your sink is gonna ship. And that's the same with an ERP. If your general ledger is set up badly, you're setting yourself up to fail. And that's really important. So sometimes people rush into it, they just set it up, but really it would be, sometimes in ERP you have to take a breath, you've got to kind of slow down and you've got to kind of go, okay, hang on, this is a system that's going to grow with us for the next 5 years, because you're not paying the amount of money you're paying for AX to reinvent it every year, which is what a lot of companies do, unfortunately. But sometimes if you just slow it down, you do your research, you speak to the right people, not salesmen, ultimately salesmen are not just going to tell you anything, but you speak to a consultant or a solution architect that you trust. Really slow it down, get your general ledger set up correctly. The rest of the sub-modules, if you make mistakes, you make mistakes, you can learn from them. But the general ledger, once it's set up and you start transacting on it, it becomes incredibly difficult to change. So that's my, I guess, lecture or life lesson. So now I'm going to set up my chart of accounts. So I just go to general ledger, I come into setup, and there's my chart of accounts there. So I'm just going to expand that and go into chart of accounts. And I'm just going to set up a standard one. So within this system, I've actually got three accounts, or three legal entities. Now I'm going to get those three legal entities to share the same chart of accounts. I do this because for ease of administration, if I've got three separate chart of accounts for each company, it means I've then got to maintain three separate chart of accounts. If there's a common main account amongst them, I've got to then add it 3 times. If I've got to delete one, I've got to delete it 3 times. The administrative burden becomes very high. Also, what will happen is with a company or with a legal collection of companies, such as a head office or any modern multinational that owns numerous companies, at some point, all of those companies' financial records are going to have to filter up into the main company to be reported at from a header level. So let's say we've got a company and it owns 3 other companies. We don't want to know what each individual company's profit and loss was. Sure, we would for those individual entities, but when we're looking at the shareholders, they want an overview of how the whole entire operations occurred. So now if those three companies all have different chart of accounts, and I want to know what revenue is, and each one has 5 different revenue accounts, that means I've got to take 15 revenue accounts and somehow map them into something that makes sense for the head office. It's difficult. Sometimes that complexity, you can't escape it. Some companies are just so big and so complex, and it just doesn't, it's not practical to make simplifications. But most people can, and the reason a lot of people don't is just because they're not creative enough. But that's just my opinion. So I'm going to create a standard chart of accounts, and I'm going to call it stat, or let's actually make it just STD so it's easier to use. And let's call this standard. I'm not going to choose a main account mask. I'm just going to close it. Okay, so now that's actually created. If you actually look here, can't see it, but I'm in the DAT company. So I'm just going to change that in my user settings. So I'll go here to, I think, system administration, I believe it is. So what I want to do is every time I log into AX, I don't want to go into the DAT company. I want to go into Kudu. And the reason I do that is because if I constantly, whenever I log into DAT, I'm going to do data entry, or I'm going to change something, and then it's going to be on the wrong company. So Kudu in this environment is set up as the head office, if you will, or the head company, and then Murdoch and JMT Properties operate as subsidiaries of Kudu. So there's my user account. So I'm going to double click that just to open it. And what I'm going to do is there's a setting here that says a default company to log into. So once that opens, I'll just change that. The system has been pretty slow today, unfortunately. So let's click edit. And we're going to change the default company to Kudu. Just had to make sure I clicked edit just to make sure, and there you go. So Kudu. There we go. So now when I log in, it'll default to Kudu. So it might be pedantic on my behalf, but it definitely saves me a few clicks every day. So I'm now going to open Excel, and I'm going to start importing my chart of accounts into AX. So in the previous episode, or lesson, whatever you want to call it, we installed the Office add-in. So we're now going to use that Office add-in in order to load the chart of accounts. So the reason why I created a chart of accounts in AX was because I'm now loading the main accounts directly to the table, but that chart of accounts still has to exist. So I'm going to open a blank workbook. We're going to wait a while for this computer or this VM to operate. I think I might actually have to up the specs on this eventually, because this isn't operating fast enough for me. Okay, but let's go into Dynamics AX. We're going to add the data, and we're going to add tables. Oh, you know what it is? It's my wonderful OneDrive. Because I'm uploading stuff, that always messes with my speed. So I'm just going to pause that sync in for 8 hours. I guarantee you now it's going to be quicker. Yeah. And that's just something to take note of. OneDrive can kill your internet performance, especially in Australia, which the government promised NBN, and instead we got snail mail, or insert disparaging remark there, because the internet in Australia it's really, really poor. Anyway, so we're going to select the main account, and we're going to go OK. And now what it's going to do is it's actually going to load that table into Excel. So from here, we can actually enter whatever data we want and import it directly into AX. There's a few negatives to this approach. The one is that you actually got to know the table that you're importing from, and non-technical people, that's going to be very rare whereby they would know that table. So there'd be some form of organizational knowledge that would need to be imparted. The other negative is it doesn't do like multi-table joins very well. So let's say I wanted to create that chart of accounts in here and create the main accounts, then I'd have to do all sorts of funny shenanigans. So it's good. It's a good tool, but use it for what it's meant to be used for. Don't try, solve world poverty with it or anything, because it won't do it. Cool. And we can add columns here. So I want the main account type over there. Okay, so now I've got all the fields I want. So I'm going to click fields and I'm going to refresh, and you can see there's no main accounts there. Okay, so on my local desktop, I've actually got a little list here of all of my main accounts, right? So I've got revenue, I've got expenses. If you go further down, I've got assets, I've got liabilities and owner's equity, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste these. And I've actually filled in these main account types based upon the types within that table. So if I go back here and I actually click this drop down list, it pulls this list directly from AX, so which is pretty great, it means you can't really mess it up too badly. So I've just put in total, asset, liability or whatever to the corresponding column here. So let's copy and paste this. Okay, so we copy that. We go in here and we've got main account name, main account type. I'm going to right click and just click match destination formatting. Okay, and then I'm going to put in standard. So if you remember, we created a standard chart of accounts. So I'm going to put those in there. Okay, and now we have our chart of accounts in Excel, right? So what we want to do here is we want to publish it. Oh, that's crazy. Cool. So we're going to publish it. So we're going to go publish all. And we're going to hope for the best. So let's do it. There are incomplete records. In your all records must contain valid keys in order for the... So let's try. Let's see what happens. We can always delete it. And it will give us a report here. So there you go. Dynamics AX status. Total records 49, records published 49. So let's go back and check over here how many records we wanted to be put in. And it was 50. So we've missed one somewhere along the track here. Not sure which one we missed, but I'm sure we can figure it out. So what that means, though, it's actually published that, right? So it's weird that it missed one, but that's because and that's actually because there's only 49 in here, whereas in here I think it's missed these ones over here. These are owner's equity, so I'm not too bothered for this at this point. So for the sake of this example, it should be good enough. So let's go back into AX and make sure those did indeed publish. So general ledger, again, sorry about this text, it is pretty horrible to read, but you get used to it. Okay, and we want to go into general ledger, setup, chart of accounts. Does that register? And there you go. There's all my accounts. So I now have a chart of accounts. So what that means is I can now start actually doing some transactions on this system. So if I actually look here and I go into different company, so let's go into JMT properties and I go to chart of account. There it is. So like I said, the chart of accounts is shared between companies, and for this, I guess these video series will have me kind of going through my version of Contoso, I guess. And for my version of Contoso, with the setup of companies, we're all going to share the same chart of accounts. So I think that's good enough for the chart of accounts. Next lesson, we'll go into configuring account structures. We'll also do a whole bunch of other stuff. we'll start getting the general ledger up and ready in order for us to be able to start loading some transactions and really start using the AX system. So for now, this is good enough for the chart of accounts. If you have any comments, like I said, please don't hesitate to ask. If you want to subscribe, work away. Else I'll see you guys for the next lesson. Cheers.